Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thanks for spending a little bit of your valuable time with me. I appreciate it. You've probably noticed this week there's been a gajillion articles about Trump's first 100 days in office. And so obviously I've got to talk about that. That's it's a contractual rule, actually. If you're trying to be a political pundit, you have to fall in line. You've got to talk about Trump's first 100 days or any president's first 100 days. That's just what we do in America for some reason. It's kind of weird, the 100-day thing. I don't know really the history of it, or I know that part of the reason we measure for the first 100 days is because there's normally this honeymoon period with a president when they're elected. We're kind of in a weird situation with Donald Trump in that this is his second administration. We don't often talk about presidents' first 100 days in their second administration. We tend to think of them as sort of lame ducks in their second administration, but there's so many weird things with Trump specifically. He didn't really get that honeymoon period in his first term, partially because the Democrats and the media were kind of all in on the Russia hoax, which was a hoax. I mean, Russia did not swing that election for Donald Trump, and there are still people that believe that, but they were all in on that and the Russia collusion stuff and the Steele dossier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think Trump is, it's fair to say that he was sort of robbed of that first 100 days that most presidents get. And the reason there's normally sort of a honeymoon period with that first 100 days is that it's kind of a good window to get stuff done in Congress. You've got a fresh Congress. I mean, fresh to some degree in the sense that they are elected every 2 years. And so that's the earliest in their term when they can do things and sort of insulate themselves from potential future problems with that in the midterms. So what happens is after 100 days, Congress is going to get less likely to compromise on things because they realize, like, look, my opponent's going to run an ad on this and I've got to be running for re-election basically constantly now, considering I'm already seeing articles about who are the nominees going to be for president in 2028. And again, we're only 100 days into this term. So the kind of constant campaign cycle happens. And so the problem with the measurement of the 100 days in this case with Trump, notwithstanding the things I just talked about, how he didn't really get that on his first thing. These are non-consecutive terms, so it's a little strange there. But the other strange thing is that he doesn't really seem interested in using Congress at all. So I don't know that the 100-day metric really matters at all when we're not talking about what kind of legislation did someone get passed, just because that traditionally has been the window of time where if someone's going to get a big thing like that done, they're going to potentially do it in their first 100 days or maybe this first 6 months or something. I mean, you certainly have a limited timetable where you can kind of get, even when you've got both houses of Congress, it still gets harder and harder, especially if those majorities are slim, which they were for him in 2016. They were for Joe Biden in 2020. There certainly are for Donald Trump now. I think the House keeps moving around because several Democrats have died and some of them have gone into cabinet positions. I think the current lead in the House is 3 seats for the Republicans, and it's also 3 seats in the Senate, 53-47. And so that makes it where with legislation, if you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, you're going to have some sort of compromise there. So not a lot of legislative stuff. There's actually only been 3 laws made by Congress in the first 100 days. One was the Reagan-Riley Act. One was just the kicking of the can down the road for this year's budget that started last October. They just have continued that as continuing resolutions. And Congress can't seem to do even the one thing they're supposed to do, which is pass a budget on time. And then the third thing was an anti-revenge porn bill that got I think only 2 people voted against it. That just happened this past week. So that's the only legislation that's happened. So I'm not sure that measuring his first 100 days on legislation is even fair because it doesn't seem that he's interested in passing legislation. You don't see him haranguing Congress for concessions or things that he wants from them. He does keep talking about he wants his tax cuts continued and a new budget bill for fiscal year 2026, which starts in October, and that he wants one big beautiful bill for that. So Congress is working on that allegedly, but that's really the only thing I've heard from Donald Trump of even asking Congress to do something. He's not asked for immigration reform on his desk. He's not asked for any of the tariff kind of stuff or world trade reorganization stuff to come through Congress. He's just willing to do it all by executive order. So in some ways, talking about the first 100 days doesn't really matter because I think it's a little arbitrary because almost nothing he's done in his first 100 days can be permanent. by the nature of executive orders. So we've had this escalation. Donald Trump signed more executive orders than any president in history, including FDR. And that, I think, is a reflection on what our expectations are as voters. I think we have pretty short attention spans when it comes to this stuff. And so when candidates get out there on the trail and they say, on day one, I'm going to do this, or in my first 100 days, I'm going to do this, and here's the action I'm going to take. What I hear from a lot of Trump supporters, and I read from a lot of Trump supporters that interviewed and watch people, the common refrain I see is, well, he's doing the things he said he was going to do. And thank God he's a man of action and he's getting stuff done because Congress won't do it. And I think most of these executive orders are exactly for that. It is, look at me, I'm doing the thing that my base asked me to do and voters asked me to do, and I'm going to sign this piece of paper because that's easy. There's no hard work there. There is no compromise that has to go there. There's no having to talk to people. There is just, I'm going to sign this thing and say it's done. And there's kind of two buckets of executive orders for me. There are the ones that I think are clearly legal. There are the ones that I think are illegal, and courts will work all those kind of things out and strike them down or whatnot. Within those two buckets, though, I think they're all motivated from the same sort of logic from Trump, is that he alone can do it and that he doesn't need to work with anyone else. And frankly, I think there's just a little bit of laziness there. The January 6th pardons would be a good example of this, of something that his administration, including J.D. Vance, were going on TV sort of telegraphing, no, I mean, we're not gonna just let the violent ones out. We're gonna look at this on a case-by-case basis, but it's too hard to look at thousands of cases. And so he's just like, F it, release them all. And that was a quote, by the way, from Trump. And so you get like a single thing that says, well, I'm just releasing them all. I'd rather sign my name once on this thing and just release them all. Joe Biden did this to a degree with a lot of his pardons as well, in the rush to, instead of going case by case on some of this stuff, he just kind of went, okay, let's non-violent drug offenders, let's just let them out and do clemency and stuff. The problem there is that people pled down. There are plenty of examples of people he let out of prison that were violent. It's just that they took plea deals where the violent charges got taken off, and so they looked like low-level drug offenders or something, and those people are going to be released. And so it's again sort of a, how can I get the headlines, and that's what people remember is the headline, and not have to deal with this later. And they don't really care if it even gets struck down, it seems sometimes. I mean, some of these executive orders that Trump has signed almost seem designed to get struck down in courts. It's almost like they know they won't last, but it's worth getting the press release and the attention that says, look, I did something. And then people will do one of two things. They'll either blame the courts, because that's a new favorite thing that presidents like to do. They like to sign things they know might be illegal. When the courts say they're illegal, they go, oh, the mean old courts, they struck down my law. I was trying to do the thing I said I was going to do, and the courts are being mean about it and saying I can't do it. So the courts are illegitimate. And there's certainly been a degree of that with Trump as well, just like there was with Biden and there was with Obama before that. And this has become a new thing. But I think that what that really reflects is on us as voters, is that we are okay with that. We kind of like the dictatorial president thing now. There's all these, it's like, is Trump a dictator? Are we an autocracy now? And is he a fascist? And there's all these stupid questions floating around. I'm not saying they're not conversations worth having. I just think that what the main point they miss is that voters are wanting this. Voters are happy to elect one guy that can upend the world economy. On both sides. I mean, it's like they don't really care about the illegality. They don't care about the constitutionality of anything. It's just all about, there's two arguments that I hear. On the Democrat side, what I hear is, well, Congress isn't doing anything, so I've got to do something. And it's normally the excuse for the executive action is because Congress isn't doing their jobs, and therefore someone has to do something about this. But that's not how our Constitution is set up. Donald Trump's kind of flipped that. He's not even asking Congress to do the thing. He's not even waiting for them to not do the thing. He's just going ahead and saying, I alone can fix it. And it seems like Democrats are okay with that when it happens on the left. They're okay with sort of this executive overreach as long as it aligns with the things they want. And Republicans are, for the most part, fine with excusing it when it's Trump and it's the things that they want. But my concern about this is that we are signing a bunch of executive orders that, first of all, even on the things that I agree with. So, for example, people obviously in November of 2024, when they went to the polls, there were two specific things that everyone told every polling person that could ask them were important to them. It was the economy, it was prices, specifically the inflation under Joe Biden, the record inflation over the last 40 years, highest inflation rate year over year for 4 decades. And people were upset about it because it affected them in a real way. If their wages aren't going up and their prices are going up, that real wage shrinks. And real wages are an important thing to pay attention to, because when you look at numbers, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bore you with numbers. I'm sorry that you're listening to a podcast talking about numbers. But when people talk about real wages, and this will deal with when I get to the tariff stuff in a second. When we talk about real wages, we're talking about if someone made, if we track a job over time, or an industry over time, or even just a class, the middle class, the upper class, whatever. And we're saying, here's how much they made in 1980. And then normally when we're retrospectively looking back on that, we adjust that for inflation. So we say, okay, the $60,000 you made in 1980 is 100, whatever. I don't know what the actual inflation number would be, but you'd say in today's dollars. So you'll see charts like that say in today's dollars, this is what they make. And often what you'll see is, especially on the left, you'll hear a lot of arguments that, well, like, those wages have not gone up. And that's why most economists like to look at real wages, which take not only the income levels that someone's getting, but also what are they having to spend on necessities? Have housing prices increased? Have college prices increased? Medical cost, goods, food, services, things like that. And as things get cheaper, that real wage increases even if your salary doesn't increase. Because if you have to spend less money on the goods you buy, the gap between what you have to spend and what you earn is bigger, and therefore your real wages are higher. So the only point I get into that nerdy math is because when we're talking about the tariffs, or when we're talking about what Donald Trump's goals are, the thing that he campaigned on was this promise of returning those prices to lowering those prices. That was the number one thing that people cared about, is the prices. The other thing they really cared about is the border. And that was clearly, those are the two things that mattered the most. And that's why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris just absolutely got hammered on those two things, because people had seen what their administration did with both of those things specifically, and they did not like what they saw. Donald Trump has solved the border thing by all accounts, and I will give him full credit for, it's very easy to undo what Biden did, because basically Trump had a pretty secure border situation in his first term. Biden just undoes that with executive orders. Flood of migrants come across the border. Joe Biden actually does something about that once even though he tries to blame it on Trump, he tries to blame it on Congress, and then he figures out that, you know what, this actually is something I can take care of, and I'm getting killed in the polls on this, so I've got to do something. And so he kind of undoes a few of his executive orders. And so the peak of the immigration problem we had at the southern border was we had something like 180,000 people come across the border in June of 2023. I think those are the right numbers. June of 2024 is when Biden kind of rescinds a few of those executive orders, not all of them, but some of them. And it works a little bit. We start seeing a drop in those. And through the rest of 2024, the back half of 2024, we see those numbers dropping. Not a ton, but they drop about a little less than half. So we get to December and it's like 100,000 border crossings. Donald Trump takes office on January 20th. And when we look at February's numbers from this year, border crossings, these are actually encounters. That's all we can count at the border, is like actual people that we've seen and encountered with. Drops from like 110,000 in December, I think it was 110,000, to 11,000. In February. So 11,000 in February after Trump takes office, at the height of Biden's border kind of craziness. 180,000 people. That's per month. That's a huge drop, and credit where credit is due. Donald Trump was right. This was not a congressional problem. This was just, you needed a different president to sign a different executive order, and essentially Trump just went back to what his policy was in his first term. There's some changes there because remain in Mexico and some things are still up in the air. But the point is, he got that win on day one, and it wasn't too hard. And some of that's just the rhetoric he used. It was clearly that, there are not as many people showing up to the border to even be encountered. So because I think that they understand that Donald Trump is serious about deporting those people and not letting them in. And so they think like, why would I spend money? Because that's what most of these people have to do. They pay cartels to smuggle them into the country, and you pay like 10 grand and you get 3 tries to come across the border. Why would they try that under Trump? They had a much better chance getting in under Biden. They're just going to wait it out till the next Democrat gets in there. And that's where my problem is on this, is like, even though this is a win for Donald Trump, and I agree with it, we need a more secure border. We need to know who's coming across the border. I'm for immigration the legal way. I am for asylum seekers the legal way. But we need more judges. We need more resources down there. We need immigration reform through Congress that will actually allocate resources to this stuff. And the problem with doing it via an executive order is, just like in 2020, when Biden gets in there, the next Democratic president which I think at this point would happen. If I had to say right now who's going to win in 2028, I would say Democrats based on Republican performance so far. Just 100 days in, I realize a lot can happen in the next few years. But if you get a Democrat in there, they can just undo all of this. Now, some people would argue that, well, they won't, because I think they realize that that's a huge problem for them, that immigration is actually something they need to not soften on. They need to actually be a little harder on immigration, because it was clear that across the board, that was something people wanted when they were voting in November. Haven't seen any indication that the Democrats, I don't really know who the Democrats are. We don't really know what their identity is going to be after the losses this past November. Don't know who they are going to be going forward. I'm not sure they have to find an identity, because the last 8 years, if not more than that, has been just rejecting the party in power at the next election. It's not really about electing someone that you think will do a good job. It's like you're just rejecting the person that's currently in the job. And I think each party keeps taking the wrong hint. And so, my big problem with Donald Trump's first 100 days is that almost everything has been executive order. So even the things I like, even things like trying to get rid of DEI in the federal government, even the stuff like the DOJ of trying to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, the way he's gone about it has been so foolishly implemented that it can just be undone by the next person. When it's all executive orders, the next president, if it's a Democrat, can just undo all of that. And so what we're doing is our short attention spans as voters are essentially letting politicians get away with this. They promise stuff, they overpromise, they underdeliver. Because they feel like they're under-delivering, they sign executive orders even if they think they might be struck down by courts, or they don't really care if the next guy undoes them because they're not worried about the legacy. They're not worried about the long-term health of the country. They're just worried about their own egos. And I think Donald Trump and Biden are more alike in this than I've said it over and over again, but I really do think Donald Trump and Joe Biden have a lot of similarities in personality, in that they're both, I think, insecure, intellectually for sure. I think that they also really they care a lot more about what people think about them than they let on. And I think that that's why you see Joe Biden do his student loan forgiveness over and over again, because he was so desperate to please that part of his base. Or you see him kind of go too far to the, sort of apologetic for the basically pro-Hamas sort of style. When you track the change of Joe Biden from like the day after October 7th to, as that wages on between Israel and Gaza. And he certainly is like doing one thing with his actions and then saying something different with his words to try to appease that crowd. And I feel like Donald Trump does the same thing. And I think a lot of this is, look at me, look at all the things I can do. I can do everything via pen and executive orders. And I don't think it's going to last. And that's my biggest problem, is that our Constitution does not set up the government to be this way. And we are, even if you like all of these things, let's just say you're all in on Trump, you're all in on everything he says, and you agree with his trade policy, and let's say you agree with all of these things. If you think those are good and they're going to long-term be good for the country, wouldn't you want them to be permanent things, or at least more permanent than executive orders? So I'm not coming this from an angle of, there's a lot that he's done that I disagree with, but even the stuff I agree with, I just think is not very permanent. It will not last. And that bothers me, because I think the uncertainty is the biggest problem so far in this administration and the economy, is that no one knows what's going to happen next. And so it's very hard for people to plan for that. So, but it's worth giving the credit on, like I said, on the border stuff. It's just that I would like to see a more permanent version. If I were Donald Trump, I would have said, I want an immigration bill on my desk on week 1. I want to sign something that actually gets resources down there. It actually says in law what is allowed and what's not, so that the next Democratic president can't undo it without having more legislation passed, which would be very unlikely, because the last time we passed immigration reform, I think, was the 80s. So it's been a long time since we've taken this measure up. And so I don't think that it would be very likely. And I think Donald Trump had the political power behind him, the winds in his sail this time, unlike the first administration. So that's one thing. So what is permanent that comes out of this? I think that the trade stuff is obviously the biggest blunder of Trump. And going into the election in 2024, when I've had these conversations with people, because I think voters sort of fall into, Trump voters specifically fall into two distinct categories. There are the always Trumpers, which means no matter what he does, no matter what he says, even if it's the opposite of what he said yesterday, he's a genius. It's 4D chess. I'm with him on everything. It doesn't matter if I didn't have those principles 5 minutes ago. I have them now. I think most of this is just a way that's the only way to be a MAGA person now, is you can't ever really telegraph what principles are, because Donald Trump doesn't really have principles for the most part. And so it's hard to nail yourself. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. It's really hard to figure out where he's going to go next. So you just say, I trust him implicitly. So there's that crowd of people that you can't lose no matter what. Then there's a whole nother group of people that just said, well, so maybe there's really 3 buckets. There are like traditional Republicans that don't really like Donald Trump. They don't think he's the best, but he was better than the alternative of Kamala Harris. There's also sort of a group of people that just said, okay, I'm looking back at 2019. I remember things being normal pre-COVID. I remember there being more money in my wallet. I remember people freaking out about Donald Trump in his first term and saying he was going to do all these things, all these anti-democracy stuff. There'd never be another election again, et cetera, et cetera. And none of that stuff happened. He didn't do those terrible things that everyone said he was going to do. And so I trust that he won't do those again. To that specific crowd of people, the conversation I often had was, but hold on. The lesson he learned from his first administration is don't hire people that might tell me no or persuade me against my best interest. Not my best interest, my sort of persuade him against his instincts. Because there was a lot of that went on in his first administration. So that was always my conversation. It was like, yeah, but those adults, John Bolton's and John Kelly's and Bill Barr's and Mike Pence's and any of these people that were around him that were trying to go, okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from, but here's a better way to execute that, or here's the strategy we should use to employ that, or here's why you shouldn't do that. And normally the way to convince him of that was like, this will hurt your reputation. This will hurt you specifically. They know how to, that his ego is important to him. And I said, those people will not be there. So there will be no one to rein him in on his worst instincts, and he will just go with his worst instincts. And he was telling us what those worst instincts were on the campaign trail. He told us he wanted to do the 10% tariffs or the 20% tariffs across the board on the whole world. And I said at the time, over and over again, that will be disastrous. That will be bad for the United States economy, bad for the world economy. It will not work the way he thinks it's going to. And if no one is there to tell him, don't do this, it's a bad idea, he will do it. And everyone, tried to tell me, nah, he's not really going to do that. That's just, you got to take him seriously, not literally, whatever the hell that means. And so over and over again, people told me, well, he's not really going to do that. Well, here we are with the tariffs. And it certainly happened that we have a 10% worldwide tariff. And that was after reining back and pausing the reciprocal tariffs. I'm putting reciprocal in scare quotes if you're not watching, because they're not really reciprocal in the sense that they're not really doing anything about, Donald Trump keeps claiming that we are getting ripped off. That's his common thing, is that these other countries have been ripping us off. We're the laughing stock. And we're not going to do that anymore because they're basically tariffing our imports, but we're not tariffing their imports. And so we're putting an end to that. I don't want to get into all the reasons tariffs don't work, but I think it's pretty obvious that the stock market was happy when he got elected. It rose for those 3 months after he was elected, before he was inaugurated, kept rising. Stocks were doing well. Bond markets were doing well. Most consumer confidence, things like that, were all up. Then he announces these tariffs initially against Canada and Mexico. Then he goes back on those. Then he puts them back in place. And then he announces the Liberation Day. Again, sort of scare quotes around that, because liberation from what exactly? From low prices, I guess, is what he's liberating us from, which is so kind of him. We love raising prices. As obviously foretold in the 2024 election. That's what all the polls said, is that everyone wanted higher prices. No, they wanted lower prices. That's why they didn't like Biden. That's why they were rejecting the Democrats. And Donald Trump is promising to lower prices, and then he does an action that will obviously raise prices. And so now the hedge is, well, there might be some temporary pain, but it'll be worth it. And you don't really need all this stuff. So he's now taken to saying these things that like Bernie Sanders said and that Jimmy Carter said. It's like, yeah, you're going to have some pain, and you need to have this pain. It's for the long-term good of the country. And there are situations where that's applicable. World War II is a good example of like, yeah, we need to band together. We've got all hands on deck to win this war, and maybe things will be better. But this is a situation where it's like one guy with an executive order claiming he's got emergency powers to do this. Again, keep in mind that Constitution does not give the executive branch the ability to levy any kind of taxes, and a tariff is a tax. And so it's even shady how he's doing this. The emergencies that he implemented are fentanyl coming across the Canadian border, which less than 1% of the fentanyl we see comes across the Canadian border, so not an emergency situation. And then the other emergency is that, well, we had trade deficits with these countries, something that's been going on for decades. How can it be an emergency all of a sudden? It's really convenient that it's an emergency that never ends unless there are no longer trade deficits. And then if there's no longer trade deficits, well, if the tariffs were, it's the logic is so circular, it doesn't make any sense to me. But, these are the emergency reasons he gives for implementing these tariff policies and then pausing them and then unpausing them and pausing them again. And the real problem with all of it is the uncertainty. That's really what Trump has. He's a wild card and no one knows what he's going to do next because Donald Trump's he just acts. He just reacts to things and he doesn't really have a plan. It's just something happens and he reacts to it. And then his administration has to try to figure out how to make that work. And because he's hired sycophants this time instead of people that are smart and capable, I don't think they're doing a very good job at executing. So part of the reason, he's on pace to not even deport as many people as Biden or Obama did. Now, to be fair, some of that is because the people coming across the border are so incredibly lower than the people that were coming across the border under Biden. But still, the point is, he's not even on track to deport as many people as Biden did, I think because he's hired people that are not good at executing the plan. And so if you look at the polls, and I know Donald Trump only likes polls if they say good things about him. If they say bad things about him, he calls them fake news and that they're fake polls. But look at Fox News' poll. So Fox's newest poll have him upside down on every single issue other than the border. Everyone has a higher disapproval rating than an approval rating, and that's on the economy, and that's on pricing, and that's on immigration, but not on the border. The border is the only thing that he's got a positive numbers on. And all of that happened after the Liberation Day stuff. Almost all of the polling going into it, he had higher polling going into being inaugurated than he did in his first term, and he had the wind in his sails to some degree. He's got the kind of tech bros in Silicon Valley. He's got a lot of businesses behind him. He's even got there's all sorts of political headwinds that were behind him this time. Not headwinds, I guess those would be tailwinds, whatever they are. I'm not a sailor, and so he had a lot of things going for them, and then he decided, again, because he's always thought trade was bad. This is the only maybe consistent idea he's ever had. And so he went with this, and I think he couldn't be talked out of it. And we're starting to see that the people are souring on him. And so I think, I just don't think anything else really matters about the first 100 days other than the tariff stuff, because it's not, look, there's certainly lawfare stuff. There is, the punishment of his enemies and the reward of his friends in looking at like January 6 pardons, for example, and then going after people like Chris Krebs, who was his CISA, head of CISA in his first administration, cybersecurity stuff. But because he said in 2020 that the election was not rigged, there was no cybersecurity issue, that Russia had not hacked them, no one had hacked the voting machines, any of this kind of stuff. And because of that, he's vilifying and having the Justice Department go after these enemies of his that were his hires in his first term. And so there's a vindictiveness there, but I don't know that that is necessarily going to last, because I think some of that stuff's going to get struck down in courts. And some of it's already getting struck down in just sort of the court of public opinion when you look at the polls. Not that I think polls are everything, but we haven't even seen the worst of what will happen because of these tariffs, because we don't have empty shelves yet. We don't really have huge price increases yet, because there's a little bit of most people in anticipation of these tariffs stocked up. So we're not necessarily seeing the empty shelves yet. We're not necessarily seeing supply problems, because we've got a little bit of padding because people were stocking up for this and trying to prepare for this. The problem is with the uncertainty is that no one knows where to go. So businesses don't know how to plan for hiring. They don't know how to plan for expansion. They don't know how to plan for buying or manufacturing in this stuff. Donald Trump claims he wants to get manufacturing back in the United States, but the uncertainty doesn't allow for United States companies to invest in American manufacturing, because they don't want to start building a factory and then in 2 months, Donald Trump says, you know what, never mind, we're going to cancel all the tariff stuff and you can go back to buying stuff from outside the country, because people understand that it's going to raise prices. And it's interesting, the change. It's like when I talked to people a couple months ago, it's like, no, this is going to work. It's not going to raise prices. And here's the why. And like explaining all the reasons why I'm wrong about how tariffs are going to work. Now that Donald Trump and his administration are saying, yeah, there might be a little short-term pain. Now that's the message. Well, yeah, there's going to be some pain, but it's going to be good. And now we're even moving to, you don't really need all those different kinds of deodorant. We're literally moving to Bernie Sanders, Democratic Socialist talking points in the Republican Party now. Donald Trump has resorted to this week. He said, I don't have the exact quote out in front of me, but something along the lines of when people ask, do you think this is going to affect Americans' opinions when they see shortages on shelves? And he said something along the lines of, well, yeah, but you know what? Come Christmas time, maybe there'll be $2 instead of $30, but your kids don't need $30. And those $2 might be a little bit more pricey, but you don't need as much of that stuff. And again, this is so a thing of the left. And I don't love the left-right paradigm. It's the words that we have for what we call the political parties in this country. But generally, it's the left, it's Democrats, it's liberals, it's progressives that think that they can control and they know better than consumers and they know better than you what you need and you don't need low prices on stuff. You need manufacturing jobs. Even though people are leaving manufacturing jobs to move into the service industry where they're getting paid more money and they like those jobs better. People are voluntarily leaving manufacturing. They're not getting fired or laid off necessarily from manufacturing. I'm not saying there aren't factories that have closed. It certainly is happening. And we have this nostalgia for manufacturing, but I don't think any of it's going to work because there's not enough certainty for people to actually move manufacturing here. And I think the second that we see prices across the board start going up, and I think it will happen pretty soon because we're already seeing, if you look at shipments from China, specifically, with China has the 145% tariffs, and we obviously very integrated with China's manufacturing on a lot of stuff. And 60% of our imports, by the way, all of the imports that we bring into this country, 60% of them are raw materials of some sort that we then use inside of America to build things or to use in manufacturing or various other things. So it's not like everything is, this widget that I bought from China and for cheap and then I sell and I put directly on my shelf and I sell to someone. A lot of it is steel, it's aluminum, it's minerals, it's components of stuff that then we build in America. So even the stuff that we build in America, we are relying on outside imports as parts for the building of those things. And when it comes to that, we're already seeing ships from China to America have dropped, like basically they're non-existent at the ports right now. Trucks going out of the California ports into the country were at basically the levels that they were on Thanksgiving or Christmas, which are the lowest shipping days of the year for obvious reasons, because everyone's already stocked their shelves for those big days, for that kind of holiday season. And so that's like on normal Tuesday this week, we're seeing that low level of stuff being sent out from the ports into America. So it's clearly that companies are not buying stuff. They're waiting to see what actually happens here. I don't see any way that's not going to turn into empty shelves in some regards, less choices for people and prices raising on those things. Because if we have the same demand on stuff and lower supply, the prices go up. That is just how this works every single time. I think his polls will just get worse. And I think you will potentially see anything that he did in these first 100 days undone by that specifically. Because once people are against him, and if that translates to them being angry at Congress for not checking him, that's going to be Republicans may actually have to, if they fear voters more than they fear the MAGA crowd and Donald Trump's wrath, they will choose the one that keeps them in their seat of power. That is everyone in Congress. That's all they care about now is getting reelected. So if all they care about is getting reelected, that shift just has to happen where enough people and enough voters are angry at them. And I think the only way that you can cut through that noise is people really do vote with their wallets. And sometimes that's fair and sometimes that's unfair. I would say that mostly it's a case of presidents overpromising of what they can do to the economy. But Donald Trump has no one to blame on this. And because he took so much credit for this is going to make us so prosperous, if it doesn't, I don't think people are even willing to have short-term pain if there was even for something that it can be proven to them that will be a long-term gain. And I think that with the trade war with China specifically, I don't often complain about tariffs against China because I think China is one of the unique bad actors in the world when it comes to world trade. But if you want to start a trade war with China, you don't start it with the rest of the world at the same time. You need to you want to try to encourage American manufacturing to move their stuff out of China, but move it to another country, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, wherever it might be, Vietnam. There's all sorts of countries that we could say, and we've been trying to do a little bit of that decoupling via policy. And the problem is it's not a fast thing. It's not something you can get a headline with really quick. And I think Donald Trump just wants those quick wins. And I don't know that he really even thinks that far into the future to understand that I think it will affect him negatively as far as his legacy goes. So it's weird because if you actually go look at New York Times or any of these news sites that have kind of tracked, like, here's all the executive orders that he did in his first 100 days, and here's all the scary things, here's all the autocratic stuff. I could talk about all that stuff for sure. There's a lot of stuff he's done that I think is clearly he has an autocratic tendency. Like, he wants to control everything, and he certainly wants to be the center of attention, not just with eyeballs on him in the media, but he wants to be the person that people have to come to and beg for him to give them something that they want. And that's where he sort of has businesses right now. That's where he has, obviously, Republicans in Congress. That's where he thinks he has other countries. But there's some cracks starting to show because he's claiming there's all these deals in the workings, but we can confirm none of the details of the deals. He keeps claiming that China and us are working stuff out, and China's like, we haven't met with them at all. Now, I don't trust China any further than I can throw them. The CCP lies about stuff all the time, all of it. Their internal numbers, they lie, they cheat, they steal, they do all that stuff. So it's not that I necessarily trust them, but I mean, one of the two of them are lying. There either are talks happening or there aren't talks happening. And it's just as likely now that Trump is the one lying about it, because I think that he got himself into a trade war that he realizes maybe China has the upper hand here. China has started they're not going to export any rare earth materials to us. Or anyone, I think, actually, just so that we can't even get them from other countries that they're shipping them to. And that's curious because it's like, okay, that's something we need because 98% of them come from China, so we can't quickly spin up. Part of the reason they're called rare earth, it's not that they're actually rare, it's that they're very hard to get out of the ground. It's a very technical process, and China knows how to do it, and they're basically exclusively doing it in the world. That was foolish of us to let that happen, for sure. We should have had more foresight to realize, wait a minute, here's these things that we have 900 pounds of them in every fighter jet, I think is the quote on it. And so we need those things for national security, and China just cut us off on that. How are we going to solve that? We can't spin up a rare earth mine in the next 20 days. So now China's coupled with our economy, and Trump's not wrong in saying that it will hurt China to not have someone to export all this stuff to. And that might be the case. I just think that it's a matter of who's going to blink first. Is it American consumers that are going to be upset that they can't buy things at the prices they used to? And keep in mind, it's not just, everyone thinks about cheap stuff from China as in, like, they're thinking of Temu, they're thinking of Alibaba, they're thinking of these, like, here you get the cheap Chinese knockoff thing, or it's like these little fidgety things, like this little fidget cue I had. Obviously, I'm going to guess this is made in China, right? I mean, something like this we are not manufacturing in the United States. And you're right, I don't need that thing. That's not like making my quality of life higher, but there is plenty of stuff that is in that way. Electronics, for example, we build no electronic stuff here in the United States. And so if you like your TV, you've got a big old TV that you spent $300 on at Costco, just the price of that TV 10 years ago was more. And so that's competition. That's world competition. Competition is good. That's always my view. When we see prices go up, I think that you will see that none of the other stuff that we claimed mattered in these first 100 days really did, because that will be the hinge that all this works or doesn't work on. And I don't see, because I truly do believe that tariffs are a bad way to do what he's even claiming he wants to do. I don't buy into that we need to increase our manufacturing jobs in the United States. We manufacture a ton of stuff. We are the second largest manufacturer in the world, right behind China, who has 4 times the population. And it's not that we're not manufacturing stuff, it's that we have fewer people working in those manufacturing jobs. And when people start seeing the cost of their cars go up, you're seeing new homes not being built right now, and these are going to affect jobs. And there's a very good chance, I'm not an economist. I'm not going to pretend I'm one. Smart economists that I pay attention to are not, saying hair on fire. We're definitely going to be in a recession, but the likelihood has increased since Liberation Day, because it's inevitable, most likely, that if nothing changes, of course, he could rescind all those tariffs and maybe say, I'm not going to do it again. I think the problem still there is that there's an uncertainty problem. If you give one man at the top of the executive branch the ability to tear up treaties, to tear up trade agreements, to implement tariffs whenever he wants to, and then undo them the next day, uncertainty becomes the problem. And if businesses can't plan ahead, you're going to see a drop in business investment. You're going to see a drop in employment. You're probably going to see layoffs. You're going to see price increases for sure. This is a tax on Americans, and that will be felt by everyone in the economy. It will be most felt, though, by Donald Trump's voters, the very working class he's trying to protect here and trying to build up. They're the ones that, when that gap is narrower for someone that makes $50,000 a year than it is for someone that's a millionaire. If you're a millionaire, if you make, let's say you're like let's say you're some fancy pants lawyer. Yeah, I said fancy pants lawyer. And you make, $1 million a year. The price of avocados going up by 25% is not something you are even going to notice because, maybe, let's say, I think the last figure I saw was that these Trump tariffs, as implemented, would specifically, now this is before the pause in the reciprocal ones, but the estimation on that was that it would cost American households $5,000 this year. $5,000 is a big gap if you make $50,000. That's eating into 10% of your total earnings just on price increases. If you make $1 million a year, $5,000 is just, you're not even going to notice that it's gone probably. And so this new sort of Republican coalition of working class, because he certainly got more working class voters, he got more lower class, middle class voters in this last election. He got actually more people across the board. The only demographic that didn't go up was white college educated women. That was it. Every other demographic he got more of than he got in 2020. And those are the people that are going to be the most affected by this. And so the question will be over the next 100 days is, can he keep those people happy when the prices go up, or if shelves are empty, or if their quality of life goes down, or if they lose their job? That will be what everything hinges on. If those people stick by him, then maybe he can get away with this. And maybe, and I still don't think it'll work. And I still think it will get him potentially not unelected, but I think it will get Republicans kicked out of power in 2026 potentially. So 100 days in, it's hard to forecast what the next, well, we got something 600 some odd days. So the midterms and 2 years past that till 2028 elections. And I don't want to pretend I'm going to be able to predict what's going to happen. But if nothing changes about the tariff stuff, and let's just say he pauses permanently the reciprocal ones, which I think seems pretty likely at this point, because I think he's got to realize that was the reason there was so much bad reaction to it. And maybe he just sticks with the 10% across the world. I don't know that the trade war with China works well, and I don't know who wins that thing, but it doesn't really matter. If prices go up at all, or if we have any sort of supply issues, or if people start losing their jobs, or if we do go into a recession or something, I don't think Republicans can recover for that. But my concern would be that the permanent change here is that Republicans have decided that, and Donald Trump specifically has decided that, conservatives used to be against this sort of central planning in general. We used to think that, no, the reason the federal government can't do central planning or can't plan the economy is because you can't just put a bunch of experts in Washington and then be able to pick what prices are or what people want or how the economy should work, because it doesn't work. The difference now is that Donald Trump and his people don't believe that anymore. They just think it doesn't work when Democrats do it. They're like, we can control the economy and it'll work. If you do this the right way, industrial policy is great. If you do protectionism the right way, it'll work. And there is no historical evidence that that's ever worked for any country in the history of the world. And if you have something that you'd like to show me where it did work, then by all means, but it doesn't work. And the problem is that what we're going to keep doing is this swing. And I think some of this is his executive orders and sort of dismantling the DOGE stuff of the federal government. I see two inevitable things happening there. We will have a major problem come out of firing the wrong people in the federal government that were actually good at their jobs. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk wanted to go in there with a chainsaw and just like chop it down for the sake of doing it. And instead of going in with a scalpel and saying, hey, where is the waste? Where's the fraud? Where's the abuse? Where are the people that are actually acting badly in their behavior inside the bureaucracy? We didn't do any of that, though. We just kind of said, let's go in with a chainsaw, move fast, break things like we do in Silicon Valley. And I don't think that's going to work well. But I think what it will do is it will bolster Democrats to say, they're not going to come in and be like, you know what, we believe that we should shrink the federal government. They're just going to go, we want that same power that Donald Trump has. And that's been the case, is that presidents keep expanding their power and presidents keep abusing that and like pushing that line further and further. It doesn't appear that Congress is going to take any of that back. They didn't take any back under Biden. They are not taking it back under Trump. I think the courts are the only thing that can potentially stop any of these sort of executive orders from taking place. And my concern there is that if Republicans If Donald Trump and Republicans call out the courts as illegitimate or they're, enemies of the people or they should be impeached or whatever just for handing down decisions that don't agree with Donald Trump, Democrats are already doing that. So if Democrats and Republicans are both attacking the courts now and sort of trying to delegitimize the one last branch of government that's actually maybe functioning properly, I'm not saying it's perfect. There are a lot of problems with district judges being able to do nationwide injunctions. I don't love that stuff when you can have a highly partisan judge do that. I would like to change some of the way that those work. Again, that would require Congress to do so or the executive branch to do so, and it doesn't seem anyone's willing to. But I don't see us heading towards a situation where the lesson that we voters are going to learn was maybe we shouldn't allow an executive, one person at the top of the executive branch, to have all this power. I think all we're doing is saying that guy shouldn't have that power. Let's give it to someone else. And that's essentially what we keep ping-ponging back and forth between. And so I think that Donald Trump is setting precedents right now, just like Joe Biden set precedents that Donald Trump will abuse. I think Donald Trump is setting precedents right now that Democrats will abuse in the future. And I think we're fools to think, like, picture your worst case scenario right now. Maybe it's AOC, President AOC in 2028. Maybe it's Bernie Sanders. I mean, he'd be incredibly old. I can't imagine it'd be him, but it's AOC. Maybe it's Oprah Winfrey. Maybe it's some celebrity. The Democrats certainly have a lot more celebrities than Republicans have. So I don't think it's a too far a stretch to say that it is. What if Democrats convince Barack Obama or Democrats to change the Constitution somehow and allow Barack Obama to run for a third term, much like Trump is joking about running for a third term right now? Joking. Everything starts as a joke with Donald Trump, and then it turns into a real thing. It's how everything has ever worked with him. It's like when he says it the first time, it gets the shock value he wants. He says, "I'm just kidding around," and then eventually it's like it really happens. But like, imagine your worst case scenario. Do you think that person's going to give back any of the powers that Donald Trump has claimed the president has right now? Unless the Supreme Court steps in and says the president specifically does not have the power to do that specific thing, Democrats will take it, just like Republicans will take it. And what we're going to keep doing is this ping-ponging back and forth, and I think we are in a world of hurt for a long time because of this, because I don't see until people decide that, hey, we need Congress to do their jobs, we need to be structured constitutionally like we were before. I think that's the biggest thing that Donald Trump has done in his first 100 days is continued to erode the constitutional setup of how government's supposed to work. And I think that that's going to be a problem for us for a really long time. And when we excuse it on the right, the reason I'm so against it, even when it's for things that I agree with, for example, the deportation stuff. There's this huge fight about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is this guy, this El Salvadorian national who's here illegally. He gets deported to El Salvador. The problem is that there was a court order from immigration courts that said he couldn't be deported to El Salvador because there was at least some credible threat that he was under threat of violence if he went back to his home country, because the alleged story of his original leaving of that country was because of gang threats to his family. And so anyway, it's clearly the Trump administration has admitted they made a mistake in deporting this guy to the country that the courts told him he couldn't deport him to. It's not that they're saying you can't deport him. They're saying you can't deport him to that specific country. The problem here is that he's going, well, you can't do due process for all these people, and he's a gang member, so we can do well, the problem is, like, the due process thing, that's a slippery slope. So just imagine, again, shoe on the other foot. Let's say it's a Democrat, and they want to throw you in jail for... the ATF does a bump stock ban. They go around, they find people that had bump stocks that were legal yesterday, but today they're no longer legal, and they start throwing people in jail for that. And they say, well, you don't get due process because you had an illegal weapon, and we've declared you a terrorist organization, because that's the other way Donald Trump did this with the gangs. They said MS-13 is a terrorist organization. That gives him specific powers he doesn't have otherwise. But what if Democrats come in and say, hey, if you're a member of the NRA, you are a terrorist. We're going to consider you a terrorist now. I think that has less legal ground than the MS-13 or the other gang sort of stuff that he's designated as terrorist. But I'm just saying, imagine that. I don't think it's that hard to figure out what will happen, is that we are asking for authoritarians. We want a king, essentially, at this point. And Republicans are happy when it's Donald Trump and he's doing the things that they say they agree with. I just think we are fools if we don't look down the road and say, yeah, but what if we give that power to someone that is doing things we don't like? And that's why my opinion is that we should not ever give one person the power that we've given the president. And I will say it over and over again. That, unfortunately, will require a Congress that takes their job seriously. That will not happen unless we vote the people out that aren't doing their job seriously. But the truth is, we say we have a very low opinion of Congress, but we almost never don't vote incumbents back in. So you might not like Congress, but you keep voting for your same congressman. And we've all done it because we go, well, my guy's fine. It's just the rest of Congress that's broken. But, my guys right now, even the ones I like, are not doing the things I think they need to do, which is take away Donald Trump's tariff powers, take away his emergency powers, say Congress has the power of the purse. No, you don't. And the truth is, Republicans in Congress could do that without thwarting Donald Trump. You don't have their blocking of him getting Matt Gaetz as Attorney General helped Donald Trump. It would not have helped Donald Trump to have Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Republicans did the right thing. They helped him in the long run. That might have been a fight in the short term, but you can still be on the president's side and still help himself. But Congress isn't willing to do it. His staff certainly isn't willing to do it. And I think we're going to keep seeing incompetence, because that's the other thing that is kind of the running theme of the first 100 days. You've got the Signal chat stuff. You've got the Pete Hegseth in multiple Signal chats giving out classified information. We lost a $60 million plane off of a aircraft carrier that was making a maneuver trying to dodge Houthi missiles. These are things that are mistakes that are happening. You've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Doing his stuff at Health and Human Services, which we didn't even get into. And we're basically breaking everything. And eventually those things some of that stuff needed to be reformed. It needed to be broken. But if you go in there with a sledgehammer and without a plan, people are going to notice when that thing starts affecting their lives. If we start seeing a bunch of kids die of measles in the United States, if that increases, there are real world consequences that people can see with their own eyes of a guy at HHS that's, discounting the efficacy of the MMR vaccine. And so these are things that are going to have consequences, and every action does have some sort of consequence. It has some sort of trade-off, every policy. But you're especially going to have trade-offs if you don't go in there with a plan. And the thing that I cannot get a single Trump supporter to tell me is, what is Donald Trump's plan? And I think it's because there is not one. It's all reactionary. It is how he feels on a specific day. And the only consistent thing he's always felt is that trade is bad. And so I think he will stick with that. He's not putting people around him that are telling him otherwise, really. And I think he will stick with that. And I think it will be detrimental to his presidency. I think it'll be detrimental to the entire American economy. I think it'll be detrimental to the world economy. And I think this will take a long time to undo, because this is not just a Trump problem at this point. It's a problem with the style of American governance that we've set up based on not paying attention to how the Constitution says it should work. I can't remember who it was. Some foreign leader said, we basically can't rely on what voters in Wisconsin decide every 4 years. We can't have our economy. We can't have our military support. We can't rely on what the whims of voters in Wisconsin decide every 4 years. And I think it's a really fair way for other countries to look at us. We've become unreliable. And I think Donald Trump has accelerated that. And I think it's going to be really hard to undo that knot without Congress getting involved, or without the courts saying Donald Trump and presidents that come after him no longer have these powers. I'm not super optimistic about how the next 100 days will go, or the 100 days after that. Don't, again, necessarily love the 100-day measuring mark of when someone's a success or not. I would say that he has certainly been done a lot. I just don't think that most of it will matter in the long term. So that's where I'm at on first 100 days. If you've got one thing you could do for me that I really appreciate you being here, but if you could rate the podcast, it really helps me a lot. Do that on Apple or on Spotify. And you can also tell a friend. I'm also doing some shorter version of these videos on YouTube a couple times a week, so you can check that out if you're interested. But other than that, I will catch you next time. Thanks for joining me.